Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to our Saturday morning Bible study, September 29th, 2018. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And this morning, our moderator is Mike from New York. Go ahead, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll start with a reading. What further indication need we of the real man's incorporeality than this, that John saw heaven and earth, and no temple body therein? This kingdom of God is within you, is within the reach of man's consciousness here, and the spiritual idea reveals it. In divine science, man possesses this recognition of harmony consciously in proportion to his understanding of God. That's from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy, page 576.
Thank you.
Yeah, good one. Any comments?
Well, I certainly appreciate learning more about Revelation. I know it didn't make any sense to me before, and even after I got to Plainfield, within the first few months, there were some things about Revelation, and I was completely lost. So to now have a little bit more understanding, I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
I think it emphasizes for me, this whole thing about it's a spiritual journey. I have to know that that's what it is. If I've taken the science as my path in life, then that's how I should be thinking, knowing who I am.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it certainly emphasizes the importance of understanding God. You want to experience the new heaven and the new earth based on how much you know of God. So many people know so little of Him. That's why she also says we're in different states and stages of consciousness. I like what Rawson says, Craster, in his book. The eternal heaven and earth are spoken of as new, merely because they are new to humanity's advancing understanding. Just as the Western Hemisphere is spoken of to this day as the New World, because it was discovered later, although it is old in point of existence as any other part of the earth. And then it says, Mr. Rawson has written, the word new is a doublet for now, and it is much more accurate to speak of now earth and the now heaven. There is no material earth and no material heaven. At best, there is only the belief of matter which hides the real earth, spiritual ideas, and the real heaven, the perfect state of consciousness from us. So it's all here, and we will experience heaven on earth according to our understanding of God and our expression of it. So if you're not experiencing heaven on earth, if you're experiencing hell on earth, then look within, change consciousness.
And isn't it nice that there is something we can do about it if we're not experiencing heaven on earth? We are not victims. So why was this one of Mrs. Eddy's favorite books of the Bible? She says Genesis and Revelation were her favorite books.
Because they explain her mission, her message to mankind.
Yes, and they are more spiritual. They require more spiritual sense to get the message.
The definition of revelation is communication of truth to men by God himself. There's no way you can humanly understand revelation, is there? It's just a bunch of gobbledygook. And purposely so. So the only way you can possibly understand it is with your spiritual sense. We thank God that we have Mrs. Eddy, who did understand it, and Genesis as well. And also we have the Kratzer book and the Talmud book too.
So to Mrs. Eddy, who saw the revelation clearly, there was no need for any further indication of the real man's incorporeality. It was clear to her. So we have an opportunity to make it clear to us if we want to. Seems like a lot of people need a lot more indication, though. But that's why we're here.
And Mike, I'm glad you volunteered for this one, because I know he had a lot of questions about Revelation, as we all do. So it's a good one to tackle. So thank you for volunteering.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Any more points on that reading? Okay. The topic is the spiritual revelation. Bible readings were from Revelation 21 and 2 Peter 3:9. And then under the additional readings, and this is why I had a lot of questions, because I didn't know about these two books, and I am so grateful to Plainfield for introducing me to the Revelation of St. John, an open book by Irving Tomlinson, and Revelation interpreted by Reverend G.A. Kratzer. And I thought, because it was just said, the ultimate authority on this book of the Bible is Mrs. Eddy, and in my opinion, she didn't write enough about it for my liking. But these two books have been so helpful. And they were under the two gentlemen were under the tutelage of Mrs. Eddy, so they can get a fairly good sense that they know what they were talking about. I just wanted to give a quick little history on Irving Tomlinson, and the reason I like his book so much is because he gives cross-references into Mrs. Eddy's Bible along with the Bible, and Mrs. Eddy's writings along with the Bible, and it really has opened up a whole new field of seeing that Mrs. Eddy wrote more about it. I just didn't know where she'd put it. And he wrote 12 Years with Mary Baker Eddy, which has one full chapter of incredible healings by Mrs. Eddy. And the interesting thing is he came to Christian Science not due to a personal healing. He was a minister, and on the We Knew Mary Baker Eddy series, in the 12 Years with Mary Baker Eddy, it says that what brought him to Christian Science was that one of his parishioners prompted him to find out if any church was doing the healings, which, quote, masturbate us to perform, unquote. This led him to Christian Science. And I don't have anything really on Reverend J. Kratzer. I don't know if anybody knows his history and wants to give that real quick.
I don't know, Bruce. We do know he was excommunicated, right? He wrote Dominion Within.
And early on, he was excommunicated, like 1912.
Yeah, I did read recently, and it was because he wrote this book, and he was sharing it with his people that called him for help. He was a practitioner. He was told he couldn't do it. So he was excommunicated for that, for sharing dominion within. And then after he was excommunicated, he really shared it and published it, got it out. So that, I know that much.
He also helped to publish Kimball's book.
So he was definitely one of the early workers.
Thank God that Dominion Within was made available. Because before I even moved to Plainfield, that was the first book that I read. And it lit a fire in my heart. So I'm feeling very close to Dominion Within and Mr. Kratzer for what he did and stood for, even though they tossed him out of the organization.
Well, that's why they tossed him out. He was.
Yeah.
Anyone who did anything inspired, a little bit out of the box, a little bit not what they told you to do, then it was out you go.
Well, that's good anyway. Freedom to do it.
Yeah, you got freedom. Yes, you did.
Yep.
And you can tell by this book on Revelation how what a deep understanding he had.
Okay, Mike, thank you for that introduction.
Thank you very much. And what I'll do is, I think, as it was just stated, him being excommunicated gives him that stamp of righteousness. And I'll look for the next Bible study on Revelation, see if I find anything more on him. But that's well enough. Okay, questions. Number one, and on the questions, if people would be interested in reading the citations, that would be great to volunteer for that. So question number one, who is speaking to John in Revelation 21, 3 through 7?
Read it, Bruce.
Okay. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them. They shall be his people. God himself shall be with them, and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. There shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said unto me, It is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God. He shall be my son.
Thank you. Who's speaking?
God.
God. Again, communication of truth to men by God himself. Definition of revelation. You ever feel you've gotten a revelation? Someone was saying, I think it was Royce, someone was saying one of our times together, she knew it was God because she didn't think of it. You know, it does feel like you don't think of it. It just comes to you. It just comes.
That's an important point. That's the nature of it. Man is not an originator of thoughts. Man is a reflector. And then the question is, what are you reflecting? In this case, it was directly from God, the one mind, one true mind. So it's important to say, if you got a revelation, you not think, hey, how great I am, I got this. But rather, humbly kneel before the source of it, Almighty God himself. then it really can do some good.
Thank you.
Where was John when he received this revelation?
On Patmos.
Island of Patmos.
He was in
He
prison.
was on the Isle of Patmos.
Yeah.
I happened to go to Patmos by pure chance, and he was in a very small, and you were taken in to see where he was, and he was in a very small room near the water.
So he was alone.
Thank you, Fairley.
Thank you. He was alone with his Maker. And what does the very first verse in the very first chapter of Revelation say about this? The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him, to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified it by his angel unto his servant John. So we don't know if John actually heard a voice telling him this, or whether it came as thoughts
Or vision.
or visions. I mean, he might have heard Jesus' voice. But is there any separation between Jesus and God
No.
at this point?
There isn't.
No. That's why Jesus is referred to as the Christ. He was inspired by God in everything he said and did. There was no question in John's mind whether he heard Jesus' voice, whether he felt just inspired, whether or what. There was no question in his mind that God was right there with him.
And he was more or less in prison.
Yeah, we need to, all that we're doing today, we need to apply to ourselves. Some of the greatest writings in the Bible were done in prison.
He said, I'm your companion in tribulation.
Well, anyway, to me that means that we can't complain about our lot in life. It doesn't mean, because our lot in life means that we can't hear God or have a revelation. Absolutely not. Sometimes that's what seems to bring it about. And even when Mrs. Eddy wrote Science and Health, it was in a small attic room, wasn't it? She was being tossed from place to place, totally alone.
And criticized by her own family.
She wasn't in some big mansion living gay old life, nor were any of these people. So there's never any excuse. There's never any excuse to whine about things.
And like John, she didn't spend any time doubting it either. She just kept going.
That's right.
Same thing's true with Paul. So many of his letters that we have the benefit of having were done while he was in prison.
Absolutely. And those Roman prisons were not a pleasant place.
It's not surprising that some of the incredible, redemptive experiences happen to people in prison, where they have time just with God.
Yes.
It was like solitary confinement.
Yes.
Where he was.
So apply it to yourself. If you think you can't hear God's voice for whatever reason, you all have your list of reasons as to why you can't. Well, I'm saying to that, it's all BS. You don't hear it because you have put up all kinds of blockades as to why you can't.
Well, he had nothing around him to interfere with his getting this message, did he? There were no human distractions to take him off base. Well, what is the danger of human wealth? human position in life.
You get comfortable in matter.
Yeah, the danger is it distracts you from God, your relationship with God. There are some people who can overcome that distraction. But it can be a huge, huge distraction.
In electronics, they talk about maintaining the signal-to-noise ratio, making sure the noise is really low so that the signal can get through. That made me think of that.
Well, and you see, some of these distractions, they're self-made. You know, you see everyone out jogging with their plugs in their ears, or, you know, the TV on in their house constantly. How can you get a revelation from God when you're always listening to the harsh noises of the day, so to speak? So, all are without excuse.
I think one other thing to watch out for is to emphasize the lie that I can't hear. You know, I can't hear God. I can't hear God. Well, be quiet for a minute.
And who is telling you that you can't hear God?
The crafty one, the deceiver.
Right, that's right. I mean, so you're listening to him. So right, if you're listening to him, you're right. You can't hear God because you're listening to that voice.
The wrong voice.
And the more you declare against yourself, the less you'll be able to hear God. So you have to say, I can hear God. I was created to hear my Creator. He formed me that way. You argue on the right side. Even if you feel you can't, you don't just listen to that voice that says, I can't do this, I can't do that, I do this or do that. God's not telling you that. God is saying, I'm speaking to you right now and you're not listening. So shut up that other voice and listen.
The worst thing is that little voice is me.
Is me?
Yes. I mean, that's what I'm finding out. It's me. I mean, you know, I can pretend it's coming from the outside, but if I let it in, it's still me. You know, so it's within my own consciousness that's the problem.
Yes.
Well, you've just been deceived, that's all, to think that it's you, so you keep saying it's me.
Well,
that's
no,
exactly what it wants
right.
to do. Mm-hmm.
Right. No, I mean, that's true, but what I'm saying is that then it's up to me to change.
Yeah.
And then one of the best things for me was seeing in Eustace's book, he says that, how do we know there is a God? And he says, what is the one thing that we know that nobody's ever told us, and that's that we exist. And it was like, wow, that's so true.
But that's a wonderful, very important point. We are responsible for our own experience. This is that he says, error comes to us for life. And what?
We give it all the life it has.
Right. We give it the life that it has. We have a choice. We can either give it life in our own consciousness, or we can recognize that it has no power and not give it life and refuse it. We have that choice.
Well, and it is this wrong sense of self that's telling you these things. If I were to say, Lillian, you can't hear God, Lillian would probably say, oh, yeah? But if it comes as your own voice and you're hearing it in your head, Lillian, you can't hear God, you're more apt to accept it. So ask yourself, if someone was telling you this, would you accept it? No, you'd see it as the imposter. You'd say, don't tell me I can't hear God. Who are you to tell me I can't hear God? So don't let that voice speak. It has no authority. It has none. But it's a form of, I will say this, it's a form of stupidity.
Well, it's self-dispersism,
yes,
which is not a smart thing to do.
Once you see it as the imposter it is, you do say, well, how stupid could I be telling me all this stuff? And it's not true, because God's not saying it. So don't let it trick you. It tries to trick you. It comes perfectly, normally, and naturally as your voice. But revelation, communication of truth to man by God himself, and you can't hear those revelations of truth while you're having, as Mike said, your inner conversation with yourself that's totally false.
Thank you for that stupid comment, because what's even more incredible to me now is that, and not that I'm 100% out of this, but how many times have I heard over the last 3 years in Plainfield that I can hear God? It's taken me 3 years to accept that fact. So thank you very much for that.
Well, that's how entrenched it is. It becomes very entrenched, and you just accept it. I accepted all these things because that's how I always thought. I never questioned it. So now time for thinkers has come.
And I don't know anybody who is past having to work it out, at least occasionally. We all get tempted sometimes.
And especially with the things that we're most vulnerable to, quickly we think it's us again,
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when you think of, thoughts coming to you like that, whether they come to you, directly, or whether they come through someone who's close to you, which is often how it happens. Think, shall I attach this thought to me? Is this part of me? If it's not of God, it's not part of you. So don't let it identify you.
And unfortunately, some of you have had parents or people in your life who do say things to you as a child that you're stupid, you're ugly, you're this, you're that, unfortunately. But God never said that, and that's not your mother, father, God. And so that got to rise up out of, and I know many of you have very, very well, and have shut that voice up. Sorry for that. Gives you something added to have to overcome. Much better if you have a friend or a parent who encourages you, and if they're always putting you down. But still, that voice must be shut down. It's not from God, ever.
That's why we're here together, is to help each other shut down the wrong voices.
Evans used to say it comes tailor-made. If it came to you that you have purple hair, you wouldn't believe it. But if it came some way that you would believe and accept it, that's when you have the problem.
Exactly true.
Yep.
Seems very reasonable, and so you accept it. But we should probably go on, since that's number one, and we have more to cover.
And the answer was God.
And the answer was God. I don't know how we ever could talk so much about. Oh, gosh.
Okay, then, question number 2. Is Judas Iscariot one of the 12 apostles mentioned in Revelation 21:14?
Yes.
Does anybody want to read that? Revelation 21:14.
And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb.
And 2 Peter 3:9.
The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering to usward, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance.
Thank you.
I have to mention, because probably someone will know this, but in Acts 1:15-26, it does say that Judas was replaced by Matthias or something. So I'm not necessarily saying that he wasn't there in Revelation, because by then he probably was very much redeemed. But he was replaced.
just my own thought about it is it seems that Jesus came to Paul, and during his conversion and sort of recruited him. So that's who I always thought was the replacement. Not who the other apostles chose as the replacement, but who Jesus chose.
Well, let's back up here. This is the book of Revelation. Is it talking about people or states of thought?
States of thought. The one of the commentaries was talking about that it wasn't necessarily a certain number of people, whether it included Paul or Matthias, and whether it was actually 14 or 13 or whatever.
That's true.
It's referring to the New Jerusalem. Is the New Jerusalem a place on earth?
Yes.
Spirit.
A state of consciousness.
No, we're not talking about a physical place here. What does Mrs. Eddy say New Jerusalem is?
She says it's divine science, the spiritual facts and harmony of the universe, the kingdom of heaven, or reign of harmony.
Yes. And who in Jesus' time besides Jesus best expressed that?
John.
John and the apostles.
I'm very careful when it comes to mentioning names, because persons and personality really not part of the divine character or nature.
Again, it's states and stages of consciousness. So, maybe everybody was there. Who knows?
Well, it's referring to the highest, most Christly thought at the time. Isn't it?
Spiritual individuality is important and not to be wiped out.
Exactly, and that's why it's in the book of Revelation, the names of the 12 apostles. In the foundation. It's built on the highest, most Christly thought expressed at the time. The legacy that these 12 apostles left for mankind is, it's unmeasurable. It's invaluable. It's like the woman in the book of Revelation, right? The woman in the book of Revelation left for mankind something that is beyond measuring. It's totally invaluable. Is it Mrs. Eddy? Well, we recognize that it's Mrs. Eddy because it came through her. But what came through John, the highest, most Christly thought of the time, through Jesus, was carried on by his 12 apostles.
Page 560 in Science and Health, I love this. Without a correct sense of its highest visible idea, we can never understand the divine principle. The botanist must know the genus and species of a plant in order to classify it correctly. As it is with things, so is it with persons. Don't you love that?
Thank you.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
And that's why it's so important to understand Mrs. Eddy's life. That's what Carpenter brings out. We have Bible, Science and Health, and Mrs. Eddy's example. And I'm sure the Christ example as well. But I think we should move on now.
Can I just throw out one thing? And if you say it's time to move on, I'm totally accepting. I'll throw my head under the guillotine momentarily here. I think because I did name the one name, but it was also a mode of thought. And Revelation came to John many years after Judas's betrayal, and that's in human years. And then, of course, to God, that's nothing. Now, the question is, could Judas have been redeemed enough to actually be one of those 12 apostles? So can the thought of his erroneous ways, can one repent enough from such a grave criminal act to redeem oneself to be one of God's apostles?
How long does it take to wake up?
Yes, but the Judas thought, as was known in the world at that time, is not one of the foundations of divine science.
Agreed.
And that has to be, that distinction has to be made. And again, Carpenter in Precept speaks a lot about the Judas thought. And it wasn't just something that was then there, you know, it continues. It's the Antichrist. And Mrs. Eddy describes it, Science and Health. It would kill the Christ. And that is a very good point. Thank you, Gary. It could never be one of the foundation stones, the Judas thought.
Now, we can't leave this as an open question. We have to answer the question completely. And the complete answer is the Judas thought is not one of the foundations of divine science. Judas was replaced, and his replacement continued with the other 11 apostles for the rest of their lives.
Thank you so much. That really is what I was looking for.
Thank you. Okay, now we can move on.
Can I add one thing, please? In Carpenter's spiritual, Mrs. Mary Baker Eddy, her spiritual footsteps, in chapter 99, he refers, I'm just going to read it, quote, "It is little wonder that the Master was called the Lamb of God, since he was absolutely dependent on the divine mind for everything," end quote. And I just really love that thought and wanted to share it.
Thank you.
Okay, so question number 3. What is the spiritual significance of the precious stones in Revelation 21, 19, 20?
Would like to read that?
And the foundations of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third a chalcedony, the fourth an emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth a topaz, the 10th a chrysoprasus, the 11th jacinth, the 12th an amethyst.
And I have the other 2 citations, and I really have to apologize. I did a terrible job of proofreading because the second one, Science and Health, was actually 288, line 20, which reads, and these come from Irving Tomlinson's book. Thank you very much, Mr. Tomlinson. Okay, so from the Science and Health, the chief stones in the temple of Christian Science are to be found in the following postulates: that life is God, good, and not evil; that soul is sinless, not to be found in the body; that spirit is not and cannot be materialized; that life is not subject to death; that the spiritual real man has no birth, no material life, and no death. And the citation from Retrospection and Introspection. Just a minute. Am I on the right thing here? Yes. 8525. Is the cause, our cause, is highly prosperous, rapidly spreading over the globe. Tomorrow will crown the effort of today with a diadem of gems from the New Jerusalem.
I looked up precious stones in Bible study tools online, and they state they are figuratively introduced to denote value, beauty, and durability.
Lovely.
And I have that they're the colors of the rainbow, which encircle the throne of God.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I just also found unique characteristics and value, clarity, purity as well.
I was looking at these things, and this morning when I woke, it was that the significance I thought of the precious stones was that each one of us is God's child, precious in His sight, and that when we see the revelation or we use our spiritual sense, we see that we've always been precious in His sight. And these stones represent that. And we see that we already have them. We don't have to go get them.
Yeah, I read, jewels are more beautiful when they reflect light. The more light a gem will disperse, the more color it conveys to the eye, and thus the greater its beauty. God's people are to be lights in the world, conveying the beauty of God's love to a lost world. It was wonderful reading all about jewels, how much they've been valued from ancient times. They are enduring. I mean, we have jewels that they last forever, it would seem, even on a material basis. But they represent, they're symbolic of all this beauty, reflection of light. And it was interesting, too, because many of them, not all of them, like a diamond, it begins with carbon. There are others, they just start with aluminum. An opal starts from sand. So, in other words, if we want to compare ourselves to jewels, we might start out not so great. But as we are refined and polished, I've read with diamonds, it takes tremendous pressure.
And heat.
And heat.
And time.
And time to turn carbon into a beautiful diamond. And so, with us, pressure, heat, time to bring out sparkling qualities of beautiful jewels.
Think of it. It starts out as a lump of coal and ends up as a gorgeous diamond.
Just think of it. And somehow we feel that way about ourselves.
And the only thing it needs to get there is tremendous pressure and tremendous heat. So we can read about the truth all we want. We can sit in our ivory tower and read and read and read. But until we face the pressures of animal magnetism, until we face the heat of persecution and survive and grow and prosper as a result of that pressure, that's when we become of value. That's when we become enduring. That's when we become a more clear transparency for God to work on earth. That's when our inner beauty shines.
Therefore you can't avoid those experiences.
And you
have to have them.
And you shouldn't try.
You shouldn't try. You have to walk through the fire. And don't we know that's true about gold too? The purifying fire separates the dross. Had that story about the silversmith. How does he know when it's done, right? When he can see the reflection.
And one of the most difficult things for parents, having been one, I am very sympathetic. One of the most difficult things for parents is to let their children go through tough times, experience the tough experiences that will mold and chisel and mature them. It's very tempting to protect our children from tough experiences. Yeah, we should help them avoid really stupid mistakes if we can. But we should never try to avoid the tough experiences that are going to make them truly useful to God.
You know, they say that's one of the troubles with today's American children. What do they call them? Snowflakes or something. Anyway, because the parents and helicopter parents or whatever they're called are hovering around them, trying to keep them from having any bad experience ever. And good night if anything bad happens to them. Holy Moses! Let them go to therapy for years and years and years and
take drugs.
Oh my goodness! And then just the worst thing, rather than let God's process work. I read what is fascinating is the fact that jewels are glorified commonplace matter. They represent what God can do with just plain stuff. Now, I have a deeper reference for. I always thought, well, jewels, they're kind of overrated and they're so expensive and all that kind of thing. But I guess there's a reason. There's a value put on them for what we've been talking about. It's all symbolic.
And we can appreciate what they went through.
Yes, we can
to become what they are.
Jewels are the flowers of the mineral world. They rise out of the soil of the commonplace with superior beauty because of the chemistry of God's creativity. And this was, I was just going to read, this was something by Horace Mann, who is known as the father of American public school, and who was elected to the American Hall of Fame and had a love for education, like few people in the history of our nation. He says, "Surely he who created the fragrance of flowers and music of paradise, surely he who created all colors and has mingled them together in the petals of flowers, in the armature of insects, and the plumage of birds, and has blended lily and rose in the cheek of youth, he who has strewed the bottom of the ocean with pearls, and sowed jasper and amethyst and chrysolite among the rocks, was no contemner or contempt of beauty and adornment." Bignell Young says, nothing ugly will be in the kingdom of God. Everything will be beautiful because beauty is of God. And man has often, I think through the ages, been attracted toward beauty. I'm not talking about the vain beauty and the superficial beauty, but the deep beauty of the things of God. And to appreciate them and to appreciate beauty in order is godly. Mrs. Eddy did, again, an example of it. She dressed beautifully. She looked as beautiful as she could. Again, Bignell Young says we should be as beautiful as the flowers and as unconscious of it. Have you ever seen a little child that's not beautiful? They're all little children, all little babies. They're all beautiful. Who can say one isn't beautiful? They're all beautiful. They're all so natural and expressions of God.
And innocent.
And innocent, pure, all of those things. And we are admonished to have that childlike quality. Keep the inner beauty in us as well. So, and New Jerusalem, look at its description. Absolutely beautiful.
Did anybody, or does anybody know what the definition of diadem is? I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correct.
It's a kind of crown.
diadem? Is that what
crown? Yeah, I have it, the Empire of Supreme Power.
Anciently, a headband worn by kings or royalty, sometimes embroidered with gold or set with pearls and precious stones.
And the definition I had found was a crown completely encrusted with precious stones. So I think the way Mrs. Eddy words it in retrospection and introspection is, tomorrow will crown the effort of today with a diadem of gems from the New Jerusalem. That made me think that this the precious stones were not only beautiful but also a protection and the crown of rejoicing for this New Jerusalem. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I did try to find some definitions and uses or whatever of these precious stones, and there wasn't really much on that because people don't really know that what we think of them as today is the same as back then. So sardius was found near Sardis, which we studied last spring, so that would be the Sardis thought. And again, as Gary had explained about the Judas thought, these are all representing thoughts, and doesn't have to definitely be this. Amethyst was supposed to prevent intoxication. Sapphire means, again, it's coming through things, to scrape, to shine, to be fair, open, beautiful. Comes in many colors other than just blue. Rubies and topaz are actually sapphires, and it's the second in hardness to diamond. And jasper is the 12th stone in the Jewish high priest breastplate, and it's the toughest stone as far as breaking, endures through much, much abuse. Diamonds are harder, but are brittle, so break easier, but jasper just does not break very easily.
Thank you. In the glossary, the definition of Urim is light, and the rabbis believe that the stones in the breastplate of the high priest had supernatural illumination. Because in studying this, not only New Jerusalem, but you talk about the breastplate, that precious stone. But Christian Science reveals spirit, not matter, as the illuminator of all. The illuminations of science give us a sense of the nothingness of error, and they show the spiritual inspiration of love and truth to be the only fit preparation for admission to the presence and power of the Most High. So when we talk about all of this, it's translating things into thoughts, spirit, and that's the value of it all.
Thank you very much. It makes me think of a crown with all these beautiful gems and the light shining through, and the rainbow that had been talked about earlier. Just a crown of absolute God's beauty. Is there any more on that, or shall we go on?
I just wanted to say, just from my own personal experience with diamonds, that when I work construction, if we wanted to cut through anything, we would get a diamond blade. I have a great affinity for those blades.
Is it the hardest stuff?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is. But again, it's also fascinating because I worked in the jewelry at one time, and somebody threw a bunch of diamonds in a sonic cleaner to clean. Unfortunately, they came out as diamond dust. So that was the whole point. Yes, it's incredibly hard and sharp and cuts through anything, but that's the interesting thing about mixing it in with jasper, because jasper you can found Aborigines in the Far East use it as hammers and such because it doesn't break. But diamond will cut it easily.
Well, and none of that really matters because the jewels in our crown are the truth and love life is God, good, and not evil. The truth that soul is sinless, not to be found in the body. The truth that spirit is not and cannot be materialized. The truth that life is not subject to death. The truth that the spiritual real man has no birth, no material life, and no death. That truth are the jewels that we're talking about here.
The paragraph before that says, then the raindrops of divinity refresh the earth. And that leads right into the rainbow of the stones. So isn't that interesting that in the paragraph before what you just read, you've got the raindrops, and then the rainbow comes with the stones.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Number 4. Why are so many of the symbols in Revelation 21 in sets of 12?
"12" means all. 12 is universal, total, complete.
It's considered a perfect number and symbolizes God's power and authority.
And it represents a complete set. It is sufficient to carry on its mission.
So again, it's the symbolism of what it represents. That the dimensions and descriptions of the New Jerusalem in Revelation have multiples of the number 12. Symbolic of God's spiritual kingdom. Yes, completeness. And it continues. I mean, you think we have the dozen, 12, a lot of 12.
We buy eggs by the dozen because that's sufficient.
We have 12 months of the year.
We do. 12 inches for a foot.
To a foot.
Whatever it's worth, I found somewhere it says that Jesus' very first words were spoken at the age of 12.
You mean his first recorded words in the Bible?
Yeah, not his very first words, but his
Well,
first.
I just wrote down I copied down what I saw.
Yeah, I'm sure he spoke before then, but yeah, it talked about that. There's a lot of 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles, all these 12 gates, surrounded by 12 angels.
12 stars in her crown of rejoicing.
Thank you, yes. And all of Revelation is full of, that kind of symbol, numbers.
Yeah, and it represents completeness. There's nothing else to add to it. That's why the warning, right? In the end of Revelation, any man shall take away from the words of this book of this prophecy. God shall take away his part out of the book and out of the holy city. And if any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in this book.
That's what we read about in the 1910 coup when the manual had been
tampered with. The BOD tried to add something to the manual that was already complete.
Okay, I guess we have time for the last one.
Yes, and I just wanted to say real quick, Revelation 12 is a very special book of the Bible. Chapter of Revelation 12. Anyway, sorry. Number 5. What is the light thereof? Revelation 21:23.
Read it, Bruce.
And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon, to shine in it. For the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof.
What is the Lamb?
Christ.
The
The
Christ.
Christ.
I am of God, the spiritual idea of love, self-immolation, innocence, and purity, sacrifice. Glossary. The Christ. Yeah.
Florence, do you want to share what you had written on the forum, please?
Is the light, talks about the light on the forum, that with the illumined consciousness, there's really nothing needed. Is the love, which is the light wherein we should be walking. And when we are in this light, all the darkness is gone. There can be no darkness there. That's briefly what I was saying.
Thank you.
And I think this was from Tomlinson, Miscellany 187. May the divine light of Christian Science that lighteth every enlightened thought illumine your faith and understanding, exclude all darkness or doubt, and signal the perfect path wherein to walk, the perfect principle whereby to demonstrate the perfect man and the perfect law of God. It's a good prayer.
It's a beautiful prayer.
Anyone else?
So this really gets to the question is, what do we actually see? You look around you, yourself. What do you see? You see material objects, human people acting out human life? Or do you see God at work? Do you see principle governing? Do you see the real true light? Not just what the sun illumines, not just what a light bulb will light up for you, but what the inspiration of God gives to you.
In Tomlinson, he references Science and Health, page 503, line 20, and its immortal and divine mind presents the idea of God, first in light, second in reflection, third in spiritual and immortal forms of beauty and goodness.
Thank you. And in Craster, these verses we are informed that the city of God, the spiritual consciousness, has and needs in it no material structure nor any material source of light, and that that state of consciousness is constantly lighted spiritually by God himself. What a beautiful thought. Your consciousness is constantly lighted and illumined by God himself. So you can never be without understanding. You can never be without faith, truth, hope, joy, beauty. Because God is lighting your consciousness. And in that light, you will see and experience the new Jerusalem, as did John. It's what does Mrs. Setti say? It's therefore a present
Possibility.
We can do it. Pretty encouraging, isn't it?
Yes.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, this is.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Most precious.
Thank you very much.
So much.